What's up, y'all? It's your girl J Koie, and welcome back to the channel. You already know what it is, okay? You already know what it is. We got to get into it, and of course, I know I'm going like all over the place, random with a lot of different movies, and that's just because some movies I just never have seen. So it may be some that's new, old, whatever. Just movies I just haven't had a chance to really talk about, and I just want to talk about it. So what's wrong talking about it? As titled, we're about to get into it with this film. I believe I want to say it was a 2006 drama film, kind of similar to I believe Lean on Me. I love that film too. Lean on me if you're not strong. Okay. Let me just stay on track. But anyway, it's kind of in that concept, and it's called the Run Clock Story, and it's about a teacher that moves from North Carolina to New York, and his mission is to uplift the most roughest, ruthless classroom neighborhood that you can think of. And mind you, um, he is white, and is a different perspective when you're coming in a neighborhood that's diverse, but it's just like we don't see y'all around here like that. It was just one of those concepts, but he believed that he was capable of helping out these kids, and they were seventh graders. So we're gonna run back the trailers, of course. Yeah, it's not gonna be the top area because it's an old film. But it was definitely a good one. So, before I dissect it, you already know I'm gonna run it back, and we're gonna get into it, all right?
You walk away, you stay away.
I can start right now.
Inside one of New York City's worst classrooms.
Last year, this class went through 6 different teachers before Christmas.
I specialize in raising standardized test scores.
One man has come to make a difference.
Nobody wants them, and I do, so what's the problem?
They said he couldn't teach them.
Go ahead, suspend me. I wanna leave.
Hey, look, the fool's leaving already.
Sit down!
They said he couldn't control them.
These kids are at the bottom of the barrel.
You see this? This means that this year is going to be different.
So stupid.
These kids can do anything I'm asking them to do. More, they just won't.
What, you feel helpless?
My school, my rules, my way.
They feel that way every day.
You piece of garbage.
But when no one else wanted them, Ron Clark gave them the hope.
Where am I gonna go now, Mr. Clark?
I'm gonna help you.
And the courage
We are climbing up and up and up, and now it's time to jump.
to accomplish the impossible.
There's no way we're gonna pass those tests. Everyone thinks we're losers, Mr. Clark.
You are not losers.
I can't work on my paper right now. I gotta go make dinner.
I'll do it.
You do what?
I'll make dinner, and you work on your paper.
The inspiring true story
Why are you doing this? You give her these grand ideas and this world's just gonna crush her down.
If she tests well enough in May, I think we might be able to get her into Manhattan West.
My Shamika,
Yes.
that's for gifted kids.
of one man's passion.
Everything we do in this room is personal. How we work together and how we've prepared for these tests.
To change the rules
You are setting the bar here. Why? Set it up here. They can make it.
and inspire the children. Starring Matthew Perry,
And if you trust me, you can learn more than you ever dreamed of.
Ernie Hudson,
You really think it appropriate to do this with the students?
Well, I'm certainly not going to double dutch with you.
and some of the most amazing kids you've ever seen.
I teach you, and you teach me. And together we learn to love to learn.
All right. So as y'all seen the film, like I said, it's a uplifting film, inspiring film. For me, it was quite emotional. I ain't gonna lie, I was boohoo crying at the end, but it wasn't like sad tears, but more so I was just so happy. I was just so jolly. Like it was just happy tears because I was just like, I felt right shout out to the director, shout out to everybody. I'm always shouting out, even if I don't say it in my videos. I'm always trying to shout out in my description because everyone that makes these films possible, every job is important. So, shout out to y'all. So, but I believe the director, I believe her name was Rhonda, but the film was beautiful. Okay, film was beautiful. But anyway, this teacher, he comes in, okay, and rather bad, he's looking for positions. And, he's like, hey, I think this is the school, this is the spot, this is where I need to be at, and it takes a lot of convincing, but in the beginning, he did not get no respect. And I feel like most good teachers don't get the respect right off the bat because most of the time they have to prove themselves. And I mean, that's with everything, but he really had to prove himself, not only for himself to show people that he's capable of doing something, but he also had to show it to other teachers and the principal, and then plus the students, the parents. I mean, the list can go on how he literally worked his ass off to make a movement or even just some of effect to what he was trying to accomplish as a teacher. Okay, because it takes more than just being smart. It takes more than that. And sometimes I do believe that some teachers do forget why they become teachers. And sometimes you do need that reminder to where it's like, why would you want to become a teacher? It's not just for the paycheck, but it's to change lives, because being a teacher is literally to change lives and to guide the youth. Like, it just depends on whatever grade level you in, but this is like a crucial grade. I mean, I feel like every grade level is definitely important because the younger you grow, you have to teach them behavior skills. Even though you expect the parents to do it, sometimes that's not always the case, and you have to put those traits into the young kids at an early age if you can help that, because now you're helping a young child develop character. So, and the fact that you spend so many amount of hours in school with a teacher is almost like a teacher is a whole nother parent. It comes with so much stress, a lot of just believing in the kids, even when they don't believe in themselves. Okay. So this is what this film was solely about. Okay. And I felt inspired, because I'm like, this teacher, which is Mr. Clark, he had to believe in a group of kids that literally did not believe in themselves, that they did not believe in they families. Like, they had no morals. Okay, they didn't have no morals. We just go ahead and get that out of there. All right. Were they bad kids? It could be worse kids, right? But they wasn't good kids neither. Okay, they wasn't good kids either. Okay. But each of them have a background. So I first off, I loved his strategy. Before he even started, it's like, okay, let me introduce myself. Let me go door to door. Let me see who I'm working with. But let me not just work with from the students, but he's like, I want to meet the parents here. And that's overtime because no one is paying him to do that. Okay. No one is paying him to do that. And so for him to really do that, his heart is in that job. Okay. The paycheck ain't there. The heart is. All right. So, just getting off a first expression of how their living situations are, he gets a really good insight to where it's like, okay, I see what I'm working with here. They think they slick, right? The kids think they slick, but I'm slicker. So, you get an insight of the living standards and most of, pretty much, struggling or challenging neighborhoods, I would say, because I try to be respectful in just any scenario. I mean, yeah, you have your areas, rich, poor, things like that. And of course, obviously this is a poor area, single family homes, multiple kids, multiple siblings, you know, things like that, but they all had their own stories of, their lives. And it also pays into the student paying attention in school. Like, everything affects everything. I don't care what nobody says. Okay, everything affects everything. And you have to have a strong mentality. You do. And sometimes it's not always born within you. Sometimes you need to be sparked to have that strength. And I think that's what those kids needed. And so anyway, this first day of school, of course kids gonna be kids. Oh, let's see let's see how quickly we can run this teacher out. They tried everything they could possible, making bets and stuff. Just bad. Just bad. Disrespectful at one. I mean, it was tough, and not everybody's made to be a teacher. Okay. Although I love the fundamentals of things of being a teacher, I know personally I could not be a teacher because 9 10 might lose it. That's just because. But we're not talking about me. Okay, we talking about Mr. Clark. Anyway, so Mr. Clark, he's already faced with challenges, not only with just the teachers like surrounding him, the other classes, because he picked the most class that was the most rough, raunchiest, just disrespectful classroom. Okay, so he had it in for him because now you're facing with so many different attitudes, so many grown personalities, even though they're not even grown, but they grown and they feel like nobody can tell them what to do because nobody has checked them or just educated them. They think they smart when they ain't smart. Okay, and he had to learn different tactics. Every time he used to come back the next day, they destroyed the room. Just doing everything they can to run him away because apparently that's what worked. That's what worked for all the other teachers. The teachers boohoo crying, they leaving, things like that. And it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. I mean, who wouldn't get fed up? People throwing stuff. I mean, students throwing stuff at you. Not allowing you to teach, over talking you, being rude, telling you to shut up. Go to hell. I mean, just all kind of crazy shenanigans. That's rough. And then destroying the classroom, like destroying it. And then when he's trying to fix it, you got the principal talking about who vandalized this room. And it's just like, well, I did. And anything, he didn't vandalize nothing. He upgraded. Okay, but apparently, the principal is like, hey, you can't just be doing that without permission, blah blah blah. But it needed some loving. Okay, that classroom definitely needs some loving. And some people gotta realize that, like, classrooms don't need to be plain Jane. Like, give some art. Give some colors, get some sprinkles. Do something. Make it creative. It's supposed to be inspiring because the more you learn, the more you can create. Okay, the more you read and things like that, like all these things, go together, goes together, comes together. So when you're learning in a vibrant surrounding, your mind expands. Okay, just wild dreams. And Mr. Clark was all about that. I mean, did he have a hard task of expressing that? Yes, but the second method or strategy that he did, he making some rules around here because anything these bad kids need some rules. Okay, they need some rules, and I love the way he did it. He it took some a little time, but they got the message. They got the message, and the main thing for the kids' perspective was how much do you care, you know? And if it's only a paycheck, then you're not gonna last long at all, But they was testing boundaries, like most kids do. They test boundaries. And, like I said, these are seventh graders. So they're in the mix of between, you know, being in an elementary mindset and slowly transitioning into a teenager mindset. So you're in between. But it's like if you didn't really have a kid's moment of just being a kid and you only just doing all this other like survival and all that, that could take away learning. I mean it does. I mean it does. I might well say it does. It can. And he had to learn every single student in his classroom that was just experiencing even more rough challenges, and the movie touched on a lot of things because I'm like, man, I can't think of her name, but she was like the leader, honestly. She was like the attitude leader. But if I'm not mistaken, I think she said she had 3 kids. Now I don't know if the 3 kids were hers exactly, or it was just her siblings and she was just calling them kids. I have to like really rewatch it, but I think she said she had 3 kids, and I'm just like, dang girl, like what's going on, like, but I think they were more so um her siblings, and I think she just claimed them as her kids because she was a second parent in the household because in her situation her mother's working, don't have support, and her daughter that's the oldest is the second one that can help her with everything, but even though she's in 7th grade, that hindered her because she's not able to study, not able to do her homework, things like that. So it's a little challenging for her. And when no one is really, addressing her as just a human being first, you feel entitled to threaten or have that respect, you know? And we as adults, I mean, as we even grow up, I mean, even me going in school, I've seen those behaviors, like just observing things like that. And even as a kid, you don't always understand it. But as years go by, it's like, I get, why, you know, but they also just need to give themselves a chance to know that they're better. And that's something that also has to be taught. And that's what also Mr. Clark taught in the movie, or even in real life, because I don't know if I mentioned this, but this is based off a real true story. And that what makes it even more beautiful. Okay. That makes it even more beautiful. But he teaches, despite your surroundings or your upbringing, you got to believe in yourself too, and you're capable of doing that. It's possible. Beautiful things are out there. You just got to believe. And even though the parents wasn't pushing that idea, they're like, if anything, they had that fear, because they're like, I don't want my child to be disappointed if they get their hopes up. But what if they don't? What if they don't be disappointed? What if they do make something out of themselves? It's almost like do or you don't, do you do. But at the same time, it's like give yourself a chance though before you allow yourself to be held back, all because of fear. And sometimes people live off that fear for the rest of their lives just because they don't want to do nothing different, because they don't want to be a laughing stock. But sometimes that laughing stock can be the most beautiful thing that you've ever accomplished. Okay, instead of being a follower. It's enough of us, as they say, what, crab in a barrel or something like that. We don't need none of that none of that shit no more. Okay, we don't need none of that. We need people that's willing to fly, spread your wings. Okay, make a change. That's what we need. And so, Mr. Clark did everything. Like he was so determined and invested in these kids that he went all out his way. Even when he had pneumonia, he put his life at risk to teach these kids to prepare for the exams, because nobody was believing in them, you know. And he took a lot of, okay, I want to say it, but I'm gonna say he took a lot of shit. Okay, he did took a lot of shit for these kids. Okay, we're talking about more than one kid. I mean, we're talking about a lot here. But the main thing that he had to enforce them mentally is like, believe in yourself. I know that may sound, light as hell, but that statement holds so much weight. So much weight. You have to believe yourself, because sometimes not everybody around you will believe in your capabilities, and you got to prove yourself, but prove yourself to yourself first. Have faith. Whatever religion you go by, have faith. And that was the biggest thing he had to show them, because even when they were having doubts, as all we all have doubts, but he had to remind them that you guys are capable. You're smart. You don't hear it every day, because parents don't have all that time to always keep reminding their kids they're smart, they're smart, they're smart. Sometimes it does take an outsider to remind you of that. Sometimes it could take a stranger to remind you of that. But that doesn't mean it, because at the end of the day, all those parents, they showed up. When they realized that, okay, this teacher actually doing something, their kids' behavior is changing, because it's like parents want that. They want that. But do they have enough time to always do that? No. Especially if they got more than one kid. Already stressed out with reality, stressed out with job, coming home. I mean, it's a lot. Now I do tutors, not tutors, but cheers to the parents that's able to shut that off. It's like, when you go from work to home, you don't mix the two, you know. You shut that off when you go home and you be a parent. Because you can't forget to love your kids. Okay. But some parents, it's like when you get off work, you're tired. You're tired. Don't want to cook, barely want to clean. You just want to sit down and recuperate from the long ass day you just had. I get it 100%. And so that's why sometimes teachers do need to be halfway, but the teachers also don't need to have that whole entire weight. And theoretically, in the film, I mean, I do feel like, you know, the teacher, Mr. Clark, had a lot of that on his weight, but from the beginning of the movie, he did ask, like, I need your help, help me, meet me halfway, you know, to help with their homework at least, things like that. I mean, he was asking, but he also was treating every single student like a human being, you know. He didn't belittle them, he did allow them to have a voice, but at the same time, even though you have a voice, you have to know when there's a limit. You have to know boundaries. You have to know that, yes, we all got freedom of speech, but them kids had to learn, and the sooner the better, right? And they learned that. And that's what made it even more beautiful, because like you seeing them change little by little, but you looking at what took it for them to change. And sometimes fear does have to be in place indirectly. And some of it is mainly the fact that he just never gave up on them. And that's what they really love the most. Most teachers would be like, "What, you fighting in class? Detention, suspension." Naturally, that is, but he wasn't doing it. It's like, come on now. Like, yeah, okay, you angry, say sorry. Give yourself a chance. You're already on borderline. And it had nothing to do with him. Because like, yeah, you could walk out, you could ditch school, you could skip school. But what is that really doing for you? Is that it? I mean, are you getting smart? Like this ain't for him. This is really for you. So learning stuff is just really for you. And it's like a student had to choose. Now I did feel very bad for the graffiti young man. He's very talented. Now I get, if a parent will be upset, because he drew on in the damn walls, but that punishment was overboard. Okay, if you know your son love to draw and do graffiti and stuff like that, then give him the tools. I just feel like just invest. But clearly I think he was adopted or something. I don't fully remember his story. I just know that his was really rough to a point where he believed that he wasn't nothing, ain't worth nothing. He belongs to the streets. He belongs to just doing that because that's what he felt like what made him a man. But Mr. Clark, was showing him like you're talented, you're better than this, you know? And that young man didn't receive love from his direct parents. I mean, the mother seemed more afraid than anything. And that's one thing I also want to talk about with the parent situation. Sometimes if the parent don't learn from their traumas themselves, it can linger on even as an adulthood. And some of the parents are struggling with their own trauma that they can't even prevent it from happening from their own kids. So it's like it was so many different lessons being showcased in this film that made it like, it's inspiring, it's very hurtful of reality, but it's beautiful at the end of the day because it's like we all are capable of healing and fixing. Although we're not responsible of our trauma, but we are responsible for our healing. Okay. And so the mother really couldn't stand up for her son, even though she apparently was the stepmother. So apparently, I think the father was the father, but because he said something like that when they had a meeting. But she seemed more trapped in her own fears. So it's like, okay, if you're afraid yourself and you probably stuck in the age of 6 mentally, then you can't help out your kid. You can't. To where it's like, dang, the mother needs help. But, it's rough. It's tough. And I know it's tough. It's just hard in all scenarios. But the movie just highlighted a lot of different things where it's like, dang, now you see why he's acting the way he's acting. You see why he's doing like, because sometimes kids can be filled with anger. And he was the most angry kid to where he always had to sit in the very back. Okay, he was angry, but it's like, where did he get that from? And he was getting it from at home because that's the language that he learned. Okay, and he felt like that was what needed to be expressed out to get people, I'm big and bad, you know? And even though it's like, you look like a fool. You look like a fool, okay? And it just becomes comical, but I think it's more so comical from an adult standpoint because as a kid, you're taking it very personal. You're taking everything serious, and even with the joking, even joking can piss people off. Now it was a scene where, of course, old dude shouldn't have never took credit for old boy's art. I mean, what were you thinking? You just shouldn't have took the credit. So I did feel like he should have admitted and say, hey, that wasn't me. I didn't do that. But I get it. The boy wanted attention and he's like, hey, he think it's me. So I did great. It's just like, dang, so I'm not saying he should have punched him or nothing, but I mean, he should have definitely admitted to it. But I would have been angry about that situation too. I would have been like, what's up? Like you literally took credit for an art that you did not do, you know? And so, and that scene is like, okay, I get it. But it's just overall beautiful movie. But the thing is, like, he worked so hard even when he was sick. Mr. Clark, he had pneumonia, almost died trying to teach his kids. But the thing is, guess what? He didn't allow that He did not allow that ammonia to stop him from teaching because he knew that these weeks were so crucial for his students that he's like, I gotta do something else. So he supposed to been on bed rest for 2 weeks tops. So his thing was, I'm gonna film these lessons to help them out, and make them feel like I'm still there despite the fact that I cannot be in there in the classroom with them. And I thought that was so beautiful because once again, he's going beyond to the point where it's just like it just makes it even more beautiful. Now he did have a cute fine wine neighbor. I believe that she was either an actress or an artist or something like that. She had opportunities, but he was definitely feeling her. I do hope that in real life they actually got together. Like the real characters, whoever they was portraying type of style. But I think that she was very helpful, in pushing him to make him know that he's capable of being the greatest teacher as well. Um, to his students because she helped out recording him and things like that. Any helping hand is always helpful, especially when you're helping out. Like it's almost like it's not for yourself. It is literally bigger than you. It's bigger than them. And that's always beautiful to be able to do something that's bigger than yourself. And I love that. I love that. But anyway, he recorded himself, and the students still felt like he was there. But the thing is, the fact that he wasn't really completely there, they did not give him 110%. They started having doubts and things like that, nervous because they're like, oh, people say this, people say that. And it's easy to let other thoughts get in your head, especially they be like, oh, they ain't doing nothing, they gonna fail, they bad, this and that, they dumb. I mean, a lot of those things could get into your head. And even as adults, stuff like that can still get into your head, you know. But you always got to need that reminder. You need that boost. That's why it's always good to pour into yourself, be around people that remind you of who you are when you forget who you are. Okay. And for that moment, those students just forgot for a little minute. After Mr. Clark returned back, click that light bulb back into their heads. They're like, okay, we got this. We got this. Um, and he gave them choices. He gives them an ultimatum and it's like, okay, the choice is yours. And I just hope you make the right one. So, and most of them did make the right one. They did, to where even it showed that, like, the fact that the kids was changing, that taught the parents to change. Okay. And that's what made it even more 10 times beautiful. Because even in the beginning of the film, there was a young lady that wanted to be a doctor, but she barely could even talk. Her dad was always silencing everyone around the house. So, he's big and bad and extra dominant. Okay. But in the end of the movie, you see that he's a proud father. And now it's just like, okay, my kid has some sense. Maybe I should listen to her. So it was beautiful both ways because it's like you're never too old to not learn nothing. Okay. You're never too old. Learning is beautiful and you should love to learn. Okay. And I like that little funky rap. I don't know the rap that he did, but it was definitely catchy. And I felt like the kids really enjoyed that, in the film, but they did pass the exam. And that's what had me whole boohoo crying because I'm just like, they were so nervous, and everything was transpiring, beforehand with everything that is just, I was nervous for the teachers. I was nervous for Mr. Clark. I was nervous for the students, because everybody put their all into it. And it's just like, I hope they pass, it's just that and drilling it, it's like, oh my God, I'm so nervous, right? But they did good and they realized that he was a really good teacher. And, for the students to admit that they gave him a hard time, like at the end of the movie, not many people could do that. Okay. Even adults can't admit when they're wrong. So when students like seventh graders, could pull something off like that, that was beautiful. It was happy tears. Okay, happy tears. So I definitely enjoyed the movie from beginning to end. It was, very inspiring. Um, Reminded me of a lot of things. Even reminded me when my teachers used to give the classroom a lot of advice, especially when they knew that all of us would seem like we was having a rough day because of the day we was having at home or the weekend that we had. Like sometimes teachers could tell. Now I don't know if teachers still do that today. Really like deep dive into the kids like minds and just be like, hey, what's preventing you from focusing or not. But it's a good thing to be able to do. Honestly, I wish I had that type of trait to really be able to do all that. But not everybody's job is everybody's job. But I see the beautiful in it. I mean, if I was a parent, I definitely would try my best to meet the teacher halfway and educate, if I can. And if I could speed up the process, read a book every day or do some over the summer to kind of make sure that you're ahead of the game, then I'm all for that. But that's just me. I won't say I'm an overachiever, but I definitely like to achieve and accomplish a lot of stuff. So I'm big on that. But I'm also big on living your dreams, inspiring things like that. Like I love shit like that. Love shit like that. But beautiful movie Inside Out. Love the cast. Think everybody did a very good job acting, directing. The soundtrack was definitely pretty good. I feel like it fit the whole film. Even though it wasn't like, a lot, but I did like the little rap he did for the presidents. It's a president. I feel like I learned I feel like I relearned some things, okay, by being in his class. So I definitely thought it was beautiful, and it was even more beautiful when I found out that it was based off a true story, and the fact that I believe still to this day, a lot of his teachings, a lot of his rule settings, still applies, and I hope it helps other teachers to still flourish in their fields and just let them know to put their hearts into it. Hopefully teachers are letting students know that they are capable, even when they feel like they don't deserve nothing at all. But if you guys have seen this movie, please let me know your thoughts. I know it's an old film, but it was my first time seeing it. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. And like I said, if you have any comments about it or just a different perspective than what I had it on it, please let me know down below. But until next time, you guys, peace.